Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talk, Listen, and Discuss. Today, I'm going to present you New York City, in particular, Soho, where Etan Patz grew up. And what I want to do is give you a feeling, the experience of Soho at that time, that you can become more familiar with Etan Patz and what his family saw on a daily basis. So, you ready to get started? Me too. Let's go. So I am going to be reading to you from WordPress, Caroline in New York City.wordpress.com. And Caroline has a web blog where she talks about New York City, and she is going back in time to the 1970s. And I'm going to read what she has titled Soho's in the 70s. It's interview number 4 with Gary Morgan. A few weeks ago, I had a great opportunity to speak with Gary Morgan, a man who lived in Soho during the summer of 1973. Morgan was able to bring me back to Soho during this decade, detailing the culture, atmosphere, and his own personal experiences in the neighborhood. From this interview, I drafted my descriptive essay, Soho in the Summer of 1973, and was able to gain a different perspective on the neighborhood in a past decade. Culture. The atmosphere in Soho was very different in the 1970s compared to today. During this time, the area was frequented by artists during the height of the hippie movement. While several were a part of these protests, the neighborhood was much more engaged in the art and the idea of living a peaceful life than following the war in Vietnam and other global conflicts that took place in the early 70s. Walking down the streets, Morgan described the crowd as a sea of bell bottoms and women fashioning in Farrah Fawcett's feathery hairstyle. Mostly residential at the time, the streets were busy during the day and very quiet at night. Morgan's ties to Soho. During the night During the summer of 1973, Morgan purchased a bare loft, and this is interesting because this is exactly what people and in particular families, young families were doing at the time. The cost of living had become so high that houses, very much like today, were not within reach of young couples. What they did was a lot of the commercial ventures were moving out of Soho and therefore leaving a lot of empty loft buildings. So people, as in particular artists, were starting to buy these buildings and live in them, including those artists that had young families, as Eitan Pates' family did. So he purchased a bare loft above an old factory on 494 Broadway for $300 a month. Walking into his loft for the first time, the open room was completely naked with nothing but a toilet and a wooden enclosure standing awkwardly in the corner. Aiton Pates' dad would have a lot of work that he had to do in order to make that loft into a home. And I'm going to be getting a lot of that information from the excellent book written about Aiton Pates' life. And I'm going to put the title and the author in the description of this video. And I'm also going to put the link to this blog post that I'm reading to you today in the description as well. That week, Morgan and his roommate labored over their new home, tapping into the pipes themselves to install a shower and a single sink. During the weekdays, Morgan had a temporary job with the New York City Housing Orchestra. With his office just a few blocks down on Broadway, Morgan was able to both live and work in Soho, walking back and forth to work and interacting with his neighbors. This is such a very similar scenario to what Aiton Pates' family was doing. His mom was working from the home. She had her own daycare that she housed in her home. And then also the dad had he was a freelance photographer, so he was able to commit to work relatively near his home if he wanted to, but he could definitely commit to hours that were more family friendly, if you will. Ear in, EARN, that's her next category. During our interview, Morgan looked back on several of his favorite places to visit in Soho during the 1970s, including a postcard store, Let There Be Neon, and an old record store. One of his key places that I found to be a landmark in the neighborhood is Ear Inn. arguably the oldest bar in Manhattan, serving corn whiskey to the unemployed and wharf rats since 1817. Once Morgan began visiting the historic bar in the 1970s, it was frequented by hippies and young professionals. At this time, corn whiskey was replaced with wine. However, the bar's old facade, built from wood left over from the Great Fire of 1776, still preserved the historic atmosphere. Changes. When Morgan moved into his loft in Soho in 1973, the area was still emerging from industrial times. Residents were moving into structures which once housed factories and cargo space. Lofts were bare and rent was cheap. While several factories were driven uptown, few still operated on ground floors in the neighborhood, putting off heat and the smell of hot metal. Walking along Broadway and several other streets in the neighborhood, the area was lined with colorful awnings for several specialty shops and mom and pop businesses unique to the neighborhood. During this time, living in the neighborhood, however, Morgan witnessed several of the changes which transformed Soho into the retail center that it is today. Driving out several specialty stores, well-known retailers began taking over the streets, while delis were transformed into chic cafes and restaurants. At the same time, several professionals began to be attracted to the area. In response, lofts were brought up for real estate, slowly pushing out several of Morgan's neighbors as rent continued to climb and Soho became an attractive area for the upper class and several tourists visiting the island. So that is a really good description of how Soho was, the neighborhood that Etan Patz and his family lived in during the 70s. And when I was coming to the end and the changes that happened in Soho, the one thing that sticks out to me, including from the book, was that the H and Pates family, they stayed in that house for a very, very, very long time. I'll have to get back on the timing of that. But the reason they stayed there was in case Aiton ever came back, he would know where to find them. And even with all the crazy phone calls that they would get, they still kept their home number just in case Aiton Pates ever needed to call them. So that is part one of episode one. And what I wanted to do here is I want to set the tone for the environment that Aiton Pates and his family would have found themselves in. The next part I'm going to bring to you is going to come from the book itself, Over Eight and Pates, that was written by Lisa Cohen, a great book. And that book is called After Aiton, the missing child case that held America captive. Thank you for watching. And be looking for part two of episode one, where I'm going to tell you more about the actual day-to-day of Aiton Pates and his family as we immerse ourselves into Soho, New York in the 1970s. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and God bless you. See you later.